another episode of Unlock the Door Radio. Here with your host, Michael Cross with UCY TV Productions. Tonight, we are going to have a very special guest. We've had him on before, and that's Sam Vaknin, who is an expert on narcissism and psychopathy. And as you know, those people who visited my website at michaelcross.net, I deal with that quite a bit, and tonight we get a chance to hear from a leading expert in the field. Hello, Sam.
Hello, Mike. Thank you for having me yet again.
Hey, I just want to start off, before we get into the telltale signs, what's the difference between a psychopath and a narcissist?
That's an excellent question, and there are quite a few authorities in the field who believe that their distinctions are quantitative rather than qualitative. In other words, they regard a psychopath as an exaggerated narcissist. Well, that's partly true. They both lie on a spectrum of lack of empathy. So lack of empathy characterizes both. But psychopaths are also usually sadistic. They take pleasure in inflicting pain on other people. Some of them even find the infliction of pain funny. So that's one difference. Second difference is that narcissists are capable of controlling their impulses and delaying gratification. They are long-term planners. They are capable of implementing career plans and career paths, climbing the corporate ladder, and so on and so forth. So we find narcissists in many positions of power and authority, in politics, in show business, in the corporate world. Psychopaths, on the other hand, are unable to control their impulses and usually unable to delay gratification. And that's why they are overrepresented in the prison population among criminals. Another thing is that narcissists are more capable of establishing, maintaining, preserving, and nurturing interpersonal relationships. Even though they do it for very selfish reasons, they want to extract narcissistic supply from their nearest and dearest, but they still are capable of maintaining these relationships. Psychopaths are usually not capable of maintaining any long-term relationships. They go for the mark. They hit the person for money or for sex or for other benefits, and then they vanish. And finally, both the psychopath and the narcissist are in a way antisocial. In other words, they disregard society, its conventions, social cues, social treaties. They abhor authority. But the psychopath carries this disdain to the extreme. Psychopath is likely to be scheming, calculated, ruthless, callous, and very often career criminal. Narcissists act in more socially acceptable ways. Narcissists are usually pillars of the community. They are chief executive officers. They become presidents and prime ministers, while psychopaths end up being bosses of crime families or something similar, con artists. So these are subtle distinctions, admittedly, and I also think that they are the distinctions of quantity rather than quality, but sometimes quantity counts.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I guess what a lot of people would like to know is, how can you tell? What are some of the telltale signs? Let's say 10 telltale signs that you might be either dating, let's just specifically say a narcissist. You might have one as a husband or wife, or maybe a member of your family or a close friend. What are the signs that should alert people?
Well, first, let's dispel an important myth. There is a myth that narcissists, being the great actors that they are, narcissists are possessed of thespian skills. They are great at putting on a facade. They're great at acting. They're great, and that's all true. So there is this myth that because they are these great actors, it's impossible to tell that someone is a narcissist until well into the relationship. And that is not true at all. Both narcissists and psychopaths emit subtle but totally discernible signs, warning signs, red alerts that should put you on guard, even on a first encounter. And so there are dozens of these, but the important ones are these. Alloplastic defenses, the tendency to blame every mistake, every failure, every mishap, every misfortune on other people, on the world at large. The inability to assume personal responsibility, to admit to faults and to miscalculations. These people keep blaming other people. They blame the cab driver, the waiter, the weather, the government, the universe, the CIA, and you. So alloplastic defenses. The second telltale sign, and these alloplastic defenses are expressed on a first encounter, on a first date. The first time you meet a narcissist or a psychopath, he is likely to rant and rave on how hostile and stupid the world is, on how evil and malicious and calculating his boss is, on how his wife doesn't understand him, and so on and so forth. So putting the blame on other people is something that emerges on a first encounter. Second thing is hypersensitivity, or what we call in psychological parlance, hypervigilance. The narcissist and the psychopath, they're hypersensitive. They pick up fights. They feel constantly slighted, injured, insulted. They rant incessantly. They treat weak people, animals, disabled people, sick people, children, they treat them impatiently and cruelly. They express negative or aggressive emotions towards the weak, the poor, the needy, the sentimental, the disabled. So you can see this disdain and this contempt. It can't be hidden very effectively. No matter how talented you are as an actor, at the end of the day, the narcissist outs. The true figure, the true personality outs. It's there. And if you are alert enough, if you are vigilant, if you are attuned, and of course, if you are equipped with the right information, you will be able to spot a narcissist or a psychopath on a first date. Third sign is eagerness. The narcissist and the psychopath are always eager. So they push you, if you date a narcissist, he pushes you to marry him on a first or second date. He's planning to have children with you on the third date. He immediately casts you in the role of the love of his life. He presses you for exclusivity, instant intimacy, sex, and he's jealous. He's jealous from the second or third meeting. If you glance at another person, then, he's all over you. So this eagerness, this insane intensity is typical of narcissists and psychopaths. The narcissist and psychopath do not respect boundaries and do not respect privacy. So they are very likely actually, to ignore your wishes. You wish to choose from the menu, he does it for you. You wish to select a movie, he has already booked the tickets. He never consults you. He disrespects your boundaries. He treats you as an object, an instrument of gratification. He materializes on your doorstep unexpectedly. He calls you. He never calls you prior to dropping by. He goes through your personal belongings. He texts and phones you multiply, almost like stalking, So this lack of respect for your privacy, for your boundaries, for your wishes, for your needs, is a telltale sign. Narcissists and psychopaths are very controlling and very compulsive. So he insists that you ride in his car, or he insists that he should drive, not you. He holds on to the car keys, the money, the theater tickets, your bag. He disapproves if you go away for too long, by his own lights. He interrogates you when you return. Where have you been? What have you done? He tries to limit your ability to meet other people, including friends and family. So he tries to isolate you. He insists on a dress code. He wants you to dress the way he thinks you should, etc., etc. So he's a control freak. Control freakery and compulsiveness are prime signs of narcissism and psychopathy. And narcissists and psychopaths are patronizing and condescending. They criticize very often. They make snide comments and remarks. They emphasize your tiniest, minutest faults. They devalue you and other people. But at the same time as they devalue you, at the same time as they harshly and cruelly criticize you, they also exaggerate your talents and your traits and your skills. So they move like a pendulum between idealization, seeing you as the brightest, the most perfect, the love of his life, and so on the one hand, and devaluation, criticizing everything you do. You can never be right, So this pendulum movement between idealization and devaluation, this cycle, is very, very typical of a narcissist. And when the narcissist devalues, and especially the psychopath, when they devalue, they're very violent and aggressive. They don't devalue, by just, they harass, they ridicule, they call you names, they do it in public usually. Devaluation and idealization mean that the narcissist never sees you for who you really are. When he idealizes you, he is interacting with an object which is in his imagination because you are not ideal. And when he devalues you, he is equally interacting with an object, an avatar in his imagination, because you are not that bad. You are not such a failure as he makes you out to be. So in both cases, you don't exist. He interacts with a representation of you in his mind. And indeed, narcissists and psychopaths are incapable of perceiving other people as full-fledged, three-dimensional organisms with their own needs, with their own wishes, fears, dreams, hopes, and preferences. They perceive other people as instruments of gratification, as cardboard cutouts, as avatars, representations in a giant video game which is called life. So beware and be careful when you meet someone and he immediately tells you that you make him feel good, that you are the love of his life. Don't be impressed, because next thing he will tell you that it's you who makes him feel bad, that you are responsible for his violence and his aggression, that you provoke him. And finally, I would say hints of sadism. That is less typical of narcissists. It's more typical of psychopaths. Hints of sadism. So anything from sadistic sex, fantasies of rape, sexual paraphilias, attraction to porn addiction, attraction to minors, forcefulness, ignoring your pleas and requests, not hearing the no, hurting you physically and finding it amusing, abusing you verbally, and finding that amusing, and of course physical violence, and especially the transition immediately after such humiliations and abuse and battering and aggression, the transition from these to saccharine, loving, apologizing profusely, buying you gifts, groveling at your feet, and so on. These transitions are the important sign. This impossible dual personality, I don't want to say multiple personality, but sometimes it strikes the interlocutor, sometimes it strikes the observer as though narcissists and psychopaths have two personalities, if not more. It's really like some kind of dissociative identity disorder. And in my work, I suggest that pathological narcissism is a form of dissociative identity disorder, that it is a form of what used to be called multiple personality. And you can't, why people don't notice these signs immediately? Because they don't want to. On the dating scene, people are usually desperate. They have been looking, casting the net for so long. They have been alone for so long. They haven't had sex for so many years. They haven't had companionship for decades. So they tend to overlook, they tend to deny, ignore, and suppress any information which may lead them to the inevitable conclusion that they are dating a very mentally sick person. They try they actually idealize. They idealize. As the narcissist and psychopath idealize them, they idealize the narcissist and psychopath. So they find all kinds of excuses, Deep inside, he's a nice man. He had a difficult childhood. If I give him love, he will change. He promised to change. He loves me a lot. He adores me. They tell themselves all these kind of stupid stories. And I call this phenomenon malignant optimism.
Well, it seems like in today's society, you have, a lot of guys are kind of like, giving up on marriage and commitment. And then, of course, you have a large number of women whose biological clock is ticking. They're over 30. And then it seems like, in today's society, then the psychopath and the narcissist has a very happy hunting ground for potential victims.
Oh, absolutely. The dating scene is flooded with them. The dating scene, online and offline, is a negative filter. It filters out the more balanced, healthy individuals. These usually find a mate via third parties, via word of mouth, via recommendations. They are well integrated into the social fabric. They have their own social networks, and through these, they find the appropriate mate. Narcissists and psychopaths are hunters. They are predators. And so the dating scene is a filter through which only, or mostly, narcissists and psychopaths, emerge. And you're absolutely right.
Okay. Now, I have heard a lot of people who've been in relationships with psychopaths, and at least psychopaths. I don't know about narcissists, but I've read where a lot of them, they feel that the experience itself, when they were in the relationship, the sex was fantastic. They may have lived a repressed lifestyle, and all of a sudden, this person is showing them an entirely new world, getting them to go beyond their preset boundaries. And so in the relationship itself, it's something that a lot of people get a real adrenaline push from. Do you find that to be the case?
I find that there is a class of human beings, class of persons, women and men, especially women, who are attracted to spouses or to mates or to intimate partners as a form of an adventure. They regard their life as a kind of black and white movie, and here is this guy injecting it with Technicolor and with excitement and with an adrenaline rush, repeated adrenaline rushes, and with the unexpected and with a twilight zone. And so this propensity to gravitate towards the risky, towards the slightly frightening, towards the exciting is there. But again, it's a filter. A small minority of people are like that. And had they not paired up with a narcissist and a psychopath, they would have ended up racing cars or climbing mountains or providing aid to Ebola patients or what have you. This is the need to constantly experience life on the edge. And the narcissist and psychopath is a shortcut, dating a narcissist and living with a psychopath, pairing up with them, teaming up, establishing a couple with them. It's a shortcut towards achieving the constant doses of adrenaline that these junkies need. They're adrenaline junkies. So yes, if you talk to these people, they would say that the relationship with the psychopath and the narcissist has been harrowing, that they have been abused, and so on and so forth, but it was a very fascinating, interesting period, and now they feel dead inside because nothing is happening. Now they're dating a stable, healthy guy, and it's boring. It's boring, it's black and white, it's predictable, and they're dying. They feel like they're dying, slowly, incrementally, but it's death creeping up on them. And they go out, then they break up the relationship, and they go out seeking the next dose, seeking the pusher known as narcissist or psychopath. But these are highly specific people. As I just told you, some of them date narcissists and psychopaths, others climb mountains or race cars, and others end up being drug addicts. So it's a highly specific profile. I would not generalize.
Okay. Can a narcissist or a psychopath actually be a good marriage partner, though? I mean, in some cases, depending on if they're raised in a very committed family situation, can they in turn be committed to their partner?
Absolutely. In one of the chapters of my book, Malignant Self-Love, Narcissism Revisited, I discuss the phenomenon of stable narcissists. Most narcissists, actually, have an island of stability in their lives. And so there is this island of stability surrounded by an ocean of instability. So, for example, some narcissists are committed to a career path within a specific company or corporation. So they climb the corporate ladder very patiently. They invest in their work. They are workaholics, actually. 30 years later, they're the chief executive officers of the company. They started working in the company when they were 19. At the age of 50, they're the chief executive officers. So this is an example of stability. They have an island of stability, which is their workplace. Politicians are the same. They start at an early age, and 30 years later, they are senators and governors and presidents. And this requires commitment, investment, long-term planning, and stability of character and of performance. And so all narcissists, or the vast majority of narcissists, have an island of stability. Now, the island of stability could well be the family. A narcissist could be very committed to his intimate partner and to his children throughout a decades-long relationship. He can have a very stable marriage, never divorce, never cheat, be a dedicated father, a loving or simulated loving husband, and so on and so forth. And this could go on for 30 or 40 or 50 years. But then the same narcissist would be unstable in all other areas of his life. So he would change jobs very frequently. He would embark on harebrained schemes. He would lose his money. He would go bankrupt 10 times. He would relocate and dislocate and move from city to city, from town to town, from state to state, and so on and so forth. So the island of stability is usually compensated for by instability in all other areas of life. The narcissist could be stable in his family life and totally unstable in his working life, or he can be stable in his working life and get married, divorced, and remarried 7 times. So, yes, the answer to your question is yes, but it highly depends on where the narcissist establishes his island of stability.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, this sounds controversial, but can a person spot narcissism and psychopathy in, like, children?
No, absolutely not. To start with, narcissism, healthy narcissism, is the sine qua non of personal growth and development between the years 0 and 6. This, Freud called it primary narcissism. Narcissism is therefore very important for the establishment of a sense of self-worth, the emergence of self-esteem, and the acquisition of self-confidence in the formative years, which are 0 to 6. Then between the ages of 6 and 13, or 6 and 12, let's say until early adolescence, including early adolescence, narcissism is very important as a way to individuate and separate. The adolescent learns to separate himself from his parents or from his caregivers, to individuate, to become an individual by way of contradistinction. And in order to do that, that's a very frightening and harrowing task. You know, throughout your life, as a toddler, then as a child, you have learned to merge and to fuse with your parents. Your parents are the most important figures in your life. They are the caregivers, they are the providers, without whom you might as well be dead. And I mean literally, not figuratively. So dependence on the parents, merging with the parents, securing their love, is the paramount task of the toddler and the child. And then in early adolescence, there's a seismic break. In early adolescence, the child, the hitherto child, should learn to disengage, to detach, to create a fault line. It's the equivalent of an earthquake. That's why I call it a seismic break. He should learn to become his own person and to disengage from the parental influence and the parental presence. To do that, the adolescent needs to be narcissistic. Narcissism is a very important tool in separation and individuation in early adolescence. So, it would be totally meaningless to diagnose pathological narcissism until the age of 13, 14, maybe 15. Because the narcissistic behaviors and traits, which are very typical of adolescents, very typical of toddlers and young children, are actually healthy. Not so with psychopathy. Psychopathy can be, or the precursors, to be precise, the antecedents of psychopathy, can be diagnosed at an early age. Actually, there is a diagnosis in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. It's called conduct disorder. Conduct disorder is psychopathy for children. Children psychopaths are diagnosed with conduct disorder and oppositional defiant disorder. So there are children who torture animals and find it very delectable, pleasurable, and funny. They despise and abhor authority, and so they are very defiant to the point of destructiveness. They are destructive of objects, of relationships. Their behavior is criminalized and antisocial. They tend to hang out in gangs, to commit crimes, petty crimes. Some of them are very violent, and they take out their violence on siblings and neighbors and so on. So we have the telltale signs of psychopathy even in early childhood. And the reason is that psychopathy is more and more considered to be a disorder of the brain, similar to depression or to schizophrenia paranoia. These used to be thought of as mental health problems, but today we know that depression, mood disorders, schizophrenia paranoia, and probably psychopathy are the outcomes of biochemical imbalances in the brain. And therefore, they can safely be diagnosed at an early age, because brain biochemistry is almost fully determined by year 9 or 10 of life. Not so with narcissism. Narcissism is a highly complex phenomenon, which involves probably some biochemical manifestations in the brain, involves probably some genetic background. There's probably an array of genes which is responsible for the development of narcissism. I don't doubt that, and I don't doubt that it manifests in the brain in highly specific ways, but narcissism also includes a whole panoply of behaviors and traits that put together create such a complex construct that it cannot be reduced to any specific biochemical in the brain or to any specific gene or group of genes. And this is why it's not safe, it's impossible actually, to diagnose narcissistic personality disorder in anyone younger than 13, 14, and I would say 15.
Okay, interesting. Now, you earlier mentioned, I have to bring this up again, but I heard a couple of your interviews here, one of them on Israeli radio. You brought up something about politicians, and you seem to indicate that you believe that Obama displays a lot of narcissistic traits.
Yes, in July 2008, before he became president of the United States, he was at the time a senator, he caught my eye. I was roving, as is my habit, on YouTube. And suddenly I saw this video of a young black politician, gesturing and talking and so on. I said, my God, this guy has the body language of a narcissist, Who is this guy? And I started watching videos featuring Barack Obama. Again, very important to realize that when I started studying the guy in 2006, there was not a hint that he would be the president of the United States. I did not study him because he became president of the United States. I published the article suggesting that he is a narcissist before he became president of the United States. And so I ended up watching hundreds of hours of Barack Obama. He fascinated me for a variety of reasons. But I was able to discern analytically several features which are usually typical of narcissists. For instance, pronoun density, first-person pronoun density, the use of I, my, myself, and mine in speeches. I noticed that his pronoun density is very high. He uses the words I, my, myself, mine very frequently, very often. Mind you, not more often than the typical politician, but up to 50 times more often than a normal person. And that tells you a lot about politicians in general, yes? And so that was a sign. Another sign was his body language, his haughty, superior, the vision thing, body language. That was also a telltale sign. Then there were other issues. His chaotic childhood, that's usually an excellent predictor of the emergence of personality disorders. His childhood was indescribably unstable and chaotic. He was thrown from parent to grandmother to, he crisscrossed cultures and societies well before the age of 10, and diametrically opposed cultures and societies. So such a chaotic, dysfunctional childhood is usually a very good predictor of mental health problems in later life, especially personality disorders, and so on and so forth. I don't want to go into this whole long rigmarole, but I analyzed these hundreds of hours of videos, and I've reached a conclusion that he might be, and I framed my initial article very carefully. I said, Barack Obama, narcissist or merely narcissistic? I suggested that he might be a narcissist, and that was the first article was published in July 2008, and created a firestorm when he became president. Long afterwards, a year later, the article was rediscovered and created a firestorm among conservative talk show hosts and, inevitably the Republican Party and its more radical base, red states, and so on and so forth.
Okay. If he were indeed narcissistic, we see a lot of things going on right now in the world in regards to Russia. That it seems that there's not a real agenda, not a real plan. Is it because if he was narcissistic that perhaps he feels slighted by Putin? For like a year ago, Putin was considered on the front of the world stage and had usurped him in regards to Syria and some of these other issues?
I don't think it is either safe or recommended to apply a specific mental health pathology, to apply a mental health pathology to specific geopolitical situations, because the number of considerations and the complexity of arguments which go into the formation of a policy, especially in a country as bureaucratic, as complex, as hyper-structured as the United States, the number of arguments and considerations that go into the feed into the decision-making machine, these usually overshadow any specific pathology in the decision maker. Barack Obama may be the ultimate decision maker, but he's definitely not the only decision maker. And he's definitely not even the most important decision maker. The United States has a system of checks and balances which goes far beyond Congress and the executive branch and so on. There are lobbies, there are industries, there's a million. It's the most amazing empire that the world had ever seen, dwarfing anything that came before it. So to imply that the policy towards Russia, for instance, or China, or North Korea, or whatever, is the embodiment of Barack Obama's pathology would be a bit childish, I would say, and unsafe. However, what is happening between Barack Obama, for instance, and Congress is an expression of Barack Obama's personality and any pathology he may possess. His inability to collaborate, his conflictive and confrontative nature, his propensity for confrontation, his endless posturing as a victim, he's putting the blame on others constantly and consistently, including for the recent defeat in the elections, in the by-elections, yes? So all these things are typical of narcissistic pathology. And I have actually predicted his behavior in detail in interviews that I've granted as early as 2009. That's 5 years ago. I've been able to predict his current behavior 5 years ago. And it's not because I'm such a genius or endowed with divine powers, but it's simply because the unfolding and expression of the narcissistic pathology is immutable. It's always the same. It's very easy to predict the self-destruction, the self-defeating, and the other destruction that narcissistic pathologies bring in their wake. So Barack Obama's relationship with Congress, with his own nation, with himself, these things are within Barack Obama's exclusive power. And where Barack Obama is the exclusive decision maker, his pathology manifests 100% of the time and 100% accurately. So his relationship with Congress, coming back full circle, his relationship with Congress could have been and has been predicted years ago. He is driving the United States towards a constitutional crisis, predicated not on some kind of constitutional deep thinking, or not on some brinkmanship that has to do with his wish to reformulate or reframe the United States, or none of this. He is driving the United States towards a constitutional crisis because of his personality, because he has ideas of reference. In other words, he regards himself as the butt and the victim of unjust treatment, ridicule, and abuse. Because he is never to blame or is never responsible for anything. Everyone else is to blame. Congress is to blame, his party is to blame, everyone else is to blame. He is always right. He's never wrong. I don't know if you noticed that. You can't show me a single mea culpa of Barack Obama. Single case where he says, I have been wrong. I have done something wrong. After the elections a few months ago, instead of saying, I screwed up, I'm the least popular president in the history of the United States, and there must be a reason for that. I have done things wrongly. Instead of that, he said, he blamed Congress. He said, the people sent us a message about the dysfunctioning of Congress. It was Congress that the people had punished, not him, not his party. So, all these things are very indicative of deep-set narcissistic pathology, and I'm sorry and frightened to say that the end is nigh and very predictable. Barack Obama is going to drive the United States domestically. I don't think you should concentrate on Russia, Iraq, Italy, or Germany. These are not the main issues. The main issue is what Barack Obama is doing to the United States within the United States. How he is, owing to his very sick personality, dismantling the structures that the founding fathers put wisely and sagely in place, how he's dismantling these just in order to satisfy his vindictive urge for self-gratification and self-justification. This is something narcissists are incapable of controlling. These are impulses that are stronger than they are. The need to uphold the false self, the grandiose self-image, the inflated self-perception, the belief that they are always right. And they would sacrifice anything to prove that, including their own country, nation, and ultimately, as we have seen in other cases of other leaders, ultimately they would even sacrifice themselves.
Wow. Well, that's certainly, that sounds like it could be a real roller coaster for the next 2 years.
Hello? Mike, I can't hear you.
Oh, it sounds like...
Mike, I haven't heard the last sentence, I'm afraid.
Huh? Okay, hear me now?
I haven't heard the last sentence. Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, it sounds like that the United States then is in for a real roller coaster of a ride for the next 2 years.
Sure is.
Wow. Okay, well, we're coming up to the end of our time now. Where can people find more information about your books and your website and these sorts of things?
With your permission, before I respond to this last generous question, I would like to quote a towering giant of the field of personality disorders, Theodore Millon. He wrote in his book, Personality Disorders in Modern Life, he wrote this: when the egocentricity, lack of empathy, and sense of superiority of the narcissist cross-fertilize with the impulsivity, deceitfulness, and criminal tendencies of the antisocial, the result is a psychopath, an individual who seeks the gratification of selfish impulses through any means, without empathy and without remorse. These two sentences summarize a universe of knowledge about narcissists and psychopaths. I'm the author of Malignant Self-Love, Narcissism Revisited, and my website is http narcissistic-abuse.com/ and that's it. You can simply search my name, Google my name, Sam Vaknin, Vaknin, or Google Malignant Self-Love. I will come up.
Hey, excellent. And I'll put some links there to some of your work as well when this goes up on YouTube. Well,
thank you kindly, and don't forget to send me the YouTube file so that I can upload it to my own channel.
Absolutely. Well, we're coming up to the very end here. Thank you for your time, Sam. And
thank you for having me, and Happy New Year to everyone.
Yes, and you
stay away from narcissists.
Yes, and also any of that might be in my listening audience, and all the others. Anyway, thank you, and take care, everyone.
Hello, and welcome to the second half of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV. I've interviewed people who are either experts on psychopathy, or they're sociopaths or diagnosed psychopaths as well. And one thing that always jumps out when I'm looking over the checklist, like the Hare checklist on psychopathy, and other psychological articles on the condition, is that psychopaths and sociopaths and so forth do not experience guilt. But what they do experience often is a disappointment in not reaching a goal. And what I would like to do in the next 15 minutes or so is go over what I believe to be something we could actually learn from people that have the diagnosis of sociopaths and psychopaths. And that is that guilt really does hinder us. And I'm not going to I'm not saying that we should just go out and not care and just abuse people and rob, steal, cheat, and so forth. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that we should question the concept of whether guilt is a good thing. Many times religious people will say that guilt will cause people to feel bad, and then they will repent of their sins. Or guilt is something that you can get your children to feel if they do something bad. And so it has a useful purpose. I challenge that. I think actually while you may get short-term results with guilt, the long-term consequences are going to be quite negative and even devastating for individuals and their progress. And yes, I even mean in the realms of spirituality. I think that guilt, as many times as it might cause someone to try to be good and follow the commandments of their religion, it can actually cause the opposite as well. Now, let's go ahead and discuss this in the sense that, one of the people I quote a lot is Sigmund Freud. Now, a lot of people think, oh, well, Freud, I was told in my psychology class when I was in high school that no one really takes Freud that seriously. He's been disproven. And then you'll ask, well, what's been disproven? And that person, people are like, well, I don't know. He lived 100 years ago and we know so much more now. Then I would ask, why is it that marketers the government, various foundations, basically the elite, use his findings about human nature to basically brainwash or corral the masses. Okay, I've talked about this before, and I'll go into more details in further shows. But the thing is that if Freud is so discounted, why is it you always find, whenever you really research societal conformity, marketing, consumerism, and even government mind control programs, it all goes back to Freud and the study of the subconscious and how to manipulate the subconscious without the conscious knowing. Now, I'm not going to talk about that, though. What I'm going to talk about is the fact that in his writing, Civilization and Its Discontents, Freud noted that guilt was something that held civilization together. In his way of looking at it, guilt was something that caused you to bury your natural instincts and not let them come forth. You're not going to do something naughty, because then everyone will look at you and think, yo, you're a bad person, and you'll feel really guilty, and you'll hang your head down in shame. And that would control most of the masses. Therefore, just go with the flow, and you don't feel guilt. The problem with this is, of course, this goes against human nature. Now, I realize that what Freud is saying is that it has a useful function. And most people do feel guilt. However, I think we should analyze exactly what guilt ultimately is and how it controls us. I think most guilt is built up in us when we're children. We learn what's right and wrong. Our parents will say, do this or do that. Now, the thing is, this is how cultures get promoted. This is why, for instance, if you walk into a house in Japan with your shoes on and your parents scold you, you're like, oh my gosh, I've done something wrong. Or if in Sweden you talk to somebody that you don't know anywhere in public, your parents will say, you don't talk to people you don't know. And that's why you get on a bus in Sweden and all the adults are quiet. It's like there's a hostage situation or something. And they will not speak to one another, and in many cases will not assist each other if there's a problem. It's a minority of people who will actually say, can I help you with that? Oh, you're having some problems. Very rare, because there's a guilt built in. So yes, the most secular society on earth is one of the most guilt-ridden societies on earth. But the thing is that I would remind religious people of any religion is that much of the guilt we feel is cultural and has nothing to do with any teachings from God. Much of it is just, you learn it when you're young and you're trying to fit in. You're trying to fit in with your parents, and this is your life, and then it extends out into the general community slowly. And since you want to fit in and you're being told this is wrong, then you have this natural sense of I'm not fitting in and therefore I'm a bad person. And this stays with us subconsciously. Now, for some reason or another, sociopaths and psychopaths do not feel that. They just don't have that emotion. But other people, most people do. And I think guilt's fine if it involves feeling guilty if you hurt another human being. If you do something mean to somebody. I think guilt could be a very positive thing in that sense. But much of what we have as guilt is something that we are told to feel because, well, that's just the way normal people will be. And I think guilt is something that the so-called elite or the people that control society really use not just to keep people from going out and stealing from each other, but also to keep them under control and not questioning. There's a scene, just bring this up, in my first book, The Freedom from Conscience, Melanie's Journey. And if you look up my website, michaelcross.net, you'll see some links there and so forth. You can learn more about the so far trilogy that I've had published, the Freedom from Conscience trilogy. But there's a scene in which the heroine, or I should say anti-heroine, is sitting in a high school class. She's a high school student. Of course, there's some other things involved. Just it's not a story about a high school student per se. It goes into a little bit more as she's introduced to serial killing. But she's sitting in a high school class, and a liberal teacher is telling the class that they should feel guilty for the so-called crimes against humanity that have been perpetrated by the Americans. And she questions the teacher out loud. She questions him, saying that she has no responsibility for feeling anything negative about what some alleged ancestor may have done, or someone else that just happened to have lived a long time ago in the same country. And of course the teacher gets very angry that she, of course she's a psychopath, and she doesn't feel it anyway, but that she would question him. But it seems that most people in the class are just going along with it, because that's what's expected. You should feel bad. You're told by society you should feel bad for this injustice or something that this other person did. Why? Why should you feel bad? Why should you feel any kind of negativity? I don't care if you found out that your father or mother was a serial killer that went after innocents. In my books, the main character does not go out looking for innocent people. But let's say you suddenly find out that you have such a person in your ancestry that went after innocents. Why should you feel guilty for that? You didn't do it. You weren't the one who accomplished anything. So why should you feel guilty if someone 300 years ago, that whether they share your genetics or not, did something bad? And what? That should overshadow all the stuff they did good? But nevertheless, you're actually responsible for your own deeds. That's the way it should be. You're responsible for what you do. And I'm just thinking, our society tries to make us feel guilty. You're told in school, you're told in the media, you're told everywhere what you should be. And if you don't do that, well, the natural consequence should be guilt. But does it help us really, ultimately, to really be promoting guilt? I'm just thinking this. I have known people who they've tried to live certain standards in their life. Then they break those standards. I don't know, maybe someone's never smoked in their life or never drank, and suddenly they just give in and try it. Someone that's never had premarital sex, they suddenly do it. And afterwards, they're devastated. Now, some of those people will go into the sackcloth and ashes analogy, and they really will just humble themselves and feel really bad, and they will do everything they can to rectify the situation. There's others, many others, who just like a person who's on a diet for 3 months and they've eaten no junk food, they go to someone's birthday party and they give in and they eat a piece of cake. What happens then? Oh my gosh, then it's like, oh, I failed. I might as well just give up the diet. I feel so guilty that I just can't do it. So they start eating. In fact, they'll just try to make up for all that they've missed for the last several months. And the people who, many of them, have done something, they've drank alcohol, and suddenly they can't reconcile that. They feel really bad. But there is another way of reconciling, and that is just go totally off the deep end. Go to every party, just drink till you're throwing up or dying or something like that. And that's how they deal with it. Or the stereotypical minister's daughter who messes up and then all of a sudden, becomes the girl that goes out and does everyone. The thing is that is the negative form of guilt. Because if it eats away at us, sometimes people will jump out and just totally go against everything they ever believed in. And that's what I think why we should fight guilt. Now, I would say if we look at everything more cognitively, like one of my guests was explaining that, if we look at everything cognitively, why maybe I should live the morality or these ethics and so forth. Ultimately, on a cost-benefit analysis, living good is the best way. It will bring you the most benefits overall. And if you look at it as a goal, sometimes you don't reach your goal. And then you have to strive to reconcile and reach your goal next time. And most people I've known that have had little or no guilt, but they've also had a strong ethical persuasion about them, they don't mess around. They don't do bad things. They don't hurt other people because there's no point to doing it. It brings no kind of real ultimate pleasure to be a bad person. And that did not necessarily mean that they ever had to feel guilt about anything. I eat a piece of cake. If I'm on a diet, I can think, oh, well, I guess I'll repent. Instead of walking 2 miles like I was supposed to tonight, I'll walk 4 miles and get rid of the calories. And maybe that is one of those things that we could learn and try to apply in our lives. Guilt can destroy us. Guilt can cause our immune systems to go down. We start beating ourselves up. We start whipping ourselves. And we tell ourselves we're no good, that we don't measure up. And then you go into shame. And then, of course, it either immobilizes you, or you may decide just to go the opposite way. Whereas if you look at things from a goal-oriented perspective, and you live to be a good person and to try to achieve your goals in business or in education or your physical goals or your romantic goals or your family goals or whatever, then you'll do much better. And you won't just let yourself, you won't go back, sit in the corner smacking yourself. So I think that's one thing we could actually learn, is to question whether guilt is something we really do need. And maybe if we try to kind of push that away and pull in this attitude of looking at things from a cost-benefit perspective and trying to be a good person and making that a goal versus, oh my gosh, I've got to be a good person or else I will feel this shame because my parents taught me that. I think you're more genuine when you're actually trying to be a good person and it becomes part of you versus you'll punish yourself if you don't do all the good things. Anyway, we'll talk about this later. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Unlock the Door Radio, and hope to see you next week. Take care now. Bye.
In a Quinnipiac University national poll, a plurality of voters say President Barack Obama is the worst president since World War II. 33% of voters think the current president is the worst since
This is Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening to UCLive.tv.